everyone I know that's not started in climate and has gone into it is so happy because it's a really fulfilling career. It's a really fulfilling field and you can do something that you care about. It's also surprisingly lucrative. For me, I was like shocked. I was like, wait, this is something I just wanted to do when I was in middle school. I had no idea I could actually have a good career path in this field.
Climate tech is like the sun. It's rising and it's hot. Jokes aside, climate tech is a booming industry and for good reasons. We're seeing dramatic climate change across the world that could have generational consequences. The United States just invested $1 trillion with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and economically, there's a lot of opportunity to disrupt some major industries. Jackie Firsty is someone that is at the forefront of it all and has crafted her entire career around climate tech. She's currently the director of the Greentown Labs Investor Program, where she helps match climate tech ventures with investors and other funding opportunities. In this conversation with Jackie, we talked about how she started her career in climate tech, what opportunities she's seeing for others, and why she wants to help others create a career in climate tech. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Jackie Firsty. You graduated with International Baccalaureate. I'm also International Baccalaureate, so I know bragging about high school isn't always everyone's strong suit all the time, but I'm going to still brag about it here. And then you studied environmental science with a minor in sustainable business practices. And really, it feels like you've followed that your whole way. Is there anything early on that were like early influences that led you into this environmental science and especially with this like business tie-in?
I feel like not a lot of people always have this kind of set moment that really turned them into one direction and to go down a certain career path. But I did actually in middle school. So I grew up right outside of New York City in a city called Yonkers, and I was able to participate in this program called STEM. It was a program for underrepresented like inner city students to get to experience the STEM disciplines. And we got to stay in a college campus for a week over the summer. And I did this program 2 summers in a row in middle school. But the second summer that I did it, actually went to RPI in Albany, and there were a bunch of different tracks you could do. And one of them was Go Green. And that was like, that sounds cool. And I didn't note that when I was in 5th grade, I did a book report on An Inconvenient Truth. My mom handed me that book and said, you might like this, because when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I was banging on the coffee table yelling gore because my mom was very into politics and I was watching elections at that time. And so I had heard Al Gore's name before. And so she gave me that book and I read it for a book report about global warming. Again, continuing to date myself a bit. And that was like, oh man, this is a problem. 10-year-old me thought, wow, that sounds like a big problem. Fast forward 2 years to this STEM program, and I have this opportunity to do this Go Green track. And so I take it, and the week consists of activities around learning what solar panels are, using the material that you put over your windshield to keep the heat out, using that to make a solar thermal oven to bake apple crisp in, and making a model greenhouse with passive environmental design practices and like sticking plants to the green roof, and learning about all these different opportunities and visiting a wind turbine and realizing, oh my gosh, okay, there's this problem I wrote a report about 2 years ago, but there's actually solutions and I can do this as a career. And then I really never looked back after that. So how I was able to go into this kind of business and environmental science side of things, I knew I wanted to study clean energy. So I was mostly just trying to figure out what kind of degree can I do to study clean energy and take classes around that as much as possible. So that's what I did. I formed my own major, technically environmental science, but focused on clean energy, and took every class I could in pretty much every college at Northeastern. Every one of the schools I took a class in because it's really an interdisciplinary topic. And so I was able to do that. And that was really always my guiding star. So that's why I'm in the space I'm in today.
So what it sounds like is you spent a lot of time like on the science, engineering side, and then you just mentioned I took this class in every little thing. So like, why not just go to the science part rather than, hey, I'm just going to do this really broad piece of it? Like, why did you make that decision?
It's actually one I struggled with for a long time in high school and in college. Everyone said, well, you're good at math and science, so obviously go be an engineer. That's the thing to do. And obviously I was taking these STEM programs even when I was in middle school. And I realized, I guess I'm good at them, but I'm extremely extroverted. Like every personality test I ever take, you are at the farthest end of extroverted. And I knew that. And I always liked math and I always liked numbers. I definitely had a rough experience with calculus in high school that definitely turned me off a little bit. But I was like, I like math. I like understanding these concepts, but I don't know if I want to be in a spreadsheet or in kind of in the weeds on a day-to-day basis as my job. I knew I wanted to work with people and talk to people. And I also knew the value of understanding those concepts. And so a lot of what I ended up doing was stay as tangential to engineering. I actually considered doing an engineering degree on and off many times. Like I said, in high school and then even in college, you won't see it because I graduated with an environmental science degree, but actually started out as a business major in undergrad because I took a class in my senior year of high school that was a IB International Baccalaureate business class. And that was at a point where I was still thinking I was going to do engineering. And I said, wait a second, this is interesting. Business. My my grandpa and my dad both are entrepreneurs. They both have their own businesses. And so it wasn't like a surprise to think about business, but I was like, oh man, this just makes sense. Maybe I don't have to design the solar panels. Maybe I can just sell them. So I was like, maybe I should explore that. And I had, to be completely honest, chickened out a bit from doing the engineering. I was like, I don't know if I want to spend all my time taking math and science classes in college. So I ended up doing that. And I realized once I was in those classes that I was feeling like they weren't technical enough. And so I've always been straddling both worlds. And so I realized maybe in school, I should learn the technical components and then I can learn some more of the business components on the job. But I really think that having that initial first 2 years of undergrad in the business school was extremely helpful and really gave me a certain mindset around how I approach all my work that I wouldn't have had if I had started out as a science major. So I'm really grateful for that. It helped me really think about how do I get things done? How do I think about innovation, process improvement, and working with a lot of different stakeholders. And so that was really valuable as well.
Okay, time out. I wanted to just let you know that if you're looking to start your own venture, we have a free course at Station all about it. It'll help you get your foundation right with your own venture, especially if you're looking to be a bootstrapped venture. Again, it's completely free. Check it out in the description of this episode. Short timeout over, back to the interview. So to fast forward a little bit, right? So now you're the director of investor programs at Greentown Labs, which is, if you don't know Greentown Labs, it's like phenomenal green, like just everything sustainability, like just a lot of really cool innovations happening. So can you talk more about what you're doing at Greentown Labs?
Greentown Labs is the largest climate tech incubator in North America. We work with over 200 startups. We're based in Boston. I'm in our Boston office, and we also opened a second incubator in Houston on Earth Day 2021, so a couple of years ago. And we work with startups, all climate tech focused. Every startup we work with has to be thinking about some kind of climate innovation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it's a really broad mandate. So we work with companies in the agriculture sector, building sector, manufacturing, transportation, heavy industry, and electricity and energy. And we even have a sector of resiliency and adaptation, which is a kind of water treatment or air quality or carbon capture, nature-based solutions. So there's a really wide range of types of startups that we work with that all have either mostly, it started out as a hard tech incubator. So it was for people with a PhD who spun out their technology and rented a garage together, and it grew from there. But we have started to have a lot more software focused companies as well, because you need data, you need to be able to connect to smart devices, you need being able to monitor and use AI. All these things are relevant now. It's not just dumb hardware, right? The hardware has to be connected to something. And so we're seeing a lot of that as well. But so my role at Greentown is to help connect our startups with fundraising support. So I'm in the middle between our startups and a large network of investors, ranging from individual angel investors through financial VCs, all the way through corporate venture arms and even growth private equity firms, and even other types of financing as well, not just equity investments. We're also trying to support our startups with finding access to any kinds of capital. So non-dilutive funding, loans, financing for projects, anything like that, any kind of debt as well. So it's fundraising is a means to an end for a startup, right? They need the dollars so they can scale their technology. And so my role is to just be a matchmaker and help them find an investor that's got a good fit for them. And then on the other side of it, connect with a lot of different investors, make sure that they know what startups are at Greentown and try and find a fit. It looks like a lot of networking, a lot of email introductions, hosting a lot of events as well to connect the investors and the startups, and really also building out a lot of process, because 200 startups, it's hard to do a lot of individual handholding. And so we're trying to scale up our process as much as possible so we can spend as little time on admin work and as much time on actually working with the startups as possible.
200 startups. I think some people, if they haven't been in it, they don't realize how much hand holding that could go
Hmm.
easily, very easily. So I totally agree
Yeah.
with you on that. I guess two questions. I guess that might be the same answer potentially, but I guess I'll ask them as two separate questions. right? The investment side, I think a lot of startups and especially first time found, there's a lot of naiveness about how fundraising works and all of that. So has there been anything where you're like, ooh, here's like a common pitfall for those founders where like where they're super naive about investing and maybe these are this again the same answers, but is there anything you look back maybe in these like early role like when you were first starting out in this kind of work, where you're like, ooh, I was really naive about this too?
For context, the companies that we're working with at Greentown are generally in the pre-seed Series A stages. One of our criteria for joining Greentown is that a startup already has to have some form of funding. It doesn't have to be an investment. It could be non-dilutive funding, but we don't take equity in the startups. And so they're actually paying a monthly membership fee. And because of that, we need to make sure they have money to pay for their space. And we don't want to be the last dollars that the startup is spending to have space at Greentown. So it's slightly different than a lot of accelerators might be working with startup really early, and maybe they've never thought about fundraising before. So I'd say most of our startups are coming in with a general understanding of how fundraising works. Not all of them have raised a round yet. So I just put that as a caveat because I think some of the questions we might get might be slightly different than if you're working at an earlier stage, like ideation stage accelerator. But our companies are more working on scaling up. And so we do get a lot of questions. You're always going to get questions of, who should I talk to? Who's a good fit for me? And that's always going to happen. We get questions about pitch decks as well. One thing that I feel like this is not super surprising, but we work with a lot of technical founders and we end up, I have to tell them we do pitch practice sessions like internally and I give them feedback. But we also do have a pitch coach who joins us and I see lots of pitches because of this. And almost every time I have to tell the startups, your technology is amazing. And it's like the coolest thing you think about all the time. But you have to understand that an investor is hearing about 20 people like you a day, right? They're hearing about so many different types of technologies that you need to spend a lot less time telling them about how it technically works and tell them a lot more about how you think that it will be a scalable business. And it's hard for a founder to do when they're so close to the technology. And so I can spend a lot of time with our startups trying to coach them on speaking the language of an investor versus talking about their technical, because like I said, it's awesome, but the investor does have to just quickly be like, okay, I'm going to go on the assumption I might ask you questions later, but I'm going to have to go on the assumption that this works. And then let's talk about how it's going to grow because they're giving you money because they think that they're going to get a return. Just because the technology works does not mean that it's going to return dollars to an investor. And so trying to help them understand that the different incentives for the investors who are coming in and talking to them is a big thing where I think there's a lot of pitfalls around spending too much time talking about the tech and how it works. And we also definitely get a lot of questions that I get, and I wish I could answer better. So if you have anybody who is interested in this, I would love for them to reach out to me. But we get a lot of questions about valuations, terms, what should our startups, like what should they be thinking about? What are we seeing in the market? And the way that my role works is I'm usually making introductions and I'm stepping out of the picture once they get into diligence. And so I wish I had more of that context, but I don't always get to see those nitty gritty details. And so that's something that I get a lot of questions on that I wish I could answer more of. And like early on was like, I wish that this was something I thought I might be doing more of, and it's more. So like just understanding the sectors and the focus areas for investors and for startups and just making those general kind of, you two will like each other. And I think there might be a fit here.
I work with some technical founders too, and they just like, here's my tech, it's gonna work, and it's okay, but it's not a business. And I
Yes.
think even if someone might really understand what your tech is, and I think a lot of technical founders like sometimes forget like who they're talking to at times, or if it's a general
Mhm.
audience, you can't just be like, here's this buzzword or like these are really technical terms that like the general Joe Schmo or whoever's in the general audience, like they're not going to understand. So I
Yes.
totally see that all the time. And I think the advice is it's overstated, but I also think it's true. If you can explain it to a fifth grader, like that's the way to do
Yeah.
it. And
Mhm.
because if they can understand it, they're like your pitch goes really well working.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I think one thing that I think about a lot is storytelling. And so it's not just, okay, what's my technology, but you're trying to hook somebody. You're trying to hook this investor to care. And why should they care? They should care because you have an amazing technology, but more so, you are the right person to scale it. And I think that's something that, again, it's like you have to be a little arrogant because these investors are making a bet on you, especially at the early stage. Most investors, they're investing on team. They're investing because they think that you have the right background and the expertise and the ability to execute on what you say you're going to do. Because at that early stage, everything you have and you're presenting is just a guess. So you're just saying you might try and do it. But whereas like later stage and like Series B investing and later is much more numbers based, right? You have pro formas, you have statements that they can utilize to say, okay, this is going how we expect it's going to go, and we can see a very clear path to profitability or to a return on our capital. Whereas early stage investing is, we think that you might be good at this, and we think that you're going to hit it big. And that's not because the technology has already proven itself. It's because you are proving to them that you can do something. And so it's something that I think some of our founders don't always think about. And also, even if they can maybe feel that way, they might not articulate it in a way that is great. Like the amount of times we're telling our founders, hey, think about the use of pauses for emphasis. Make sure you're changing your inflection when you're speaking to keep their attention, because half of your meetings with investors are going to be on Zoom now. It is so hard to keep someone's attention on Zoom. You better be keeping their attention with either jokes or something really exciting, or pausing, interacting with them. And so sometimes it's not just, do you have something cool, but can you catch someone's attention with what you're trying to do?
100%. And I think founders, ones that I really love working with, they're like too humble for themselves, and they don't like, they're like,
Mhm.
I know this is great, but they don't want to just like tell people it's great. I'm like, no, no, tell people it's great because it is.
Mhm.
It's not an arrogance thing. It's more just like, it is great. So
Yeah.
I see that all the time. I guess with those ventures, right? So you're working with over 200 ventures and different things.
Mhm.
So has there been an innovation you've worked on, supported, that's been like a life-changing one, or one that's been really like stands out to you?
It's so hard to pick favorites with all of our startups at Greentown. There's so many amazing ones. And I think one that I'm going to have to, they're still early, but one team, again, this goes back to same as early stage investing, right? Like you're excited by the team, the people that you're working with. And we have a company called R Stream Recycling at Greentown that's working on computer vision and machine learning for robotic sorting for recycling to reduce contamination rates. And so it's supposed to be for across all types of waste. They're working on recycling first, and they're early, but they've won a lot of non-dilutive funding. The team is just really excited, really takes advantage of all the opportunities that we offer at Greentown. The founders are recently graduated from WPI, so local to Massachusetts, and it's just great to see them and the work they're doing. That's just one example. I love all of our startups, but that's just one that came to mind. And so that's really cool. And then I might just take a step back to my prior job before I was at Greentown. That was innovation that I personally worked on that was really stuck with me. And before I was at Greentown, I was actually doing community solar development. So I was on the product development side of things, running all of our projects in Massachusetts. And one thing that I was working on really heavily was agrivoltaic projects. Basically, it's uh, co-locating solar and farming. Previously, if you have a lot of solar, that be put on farmland, you'd have to take the farmland out of commission, right? You're building a project there, and let's say you have 1 acre, half the acre is solar, and the other half could be farming. But with the concept of agrivoltaics, you can say, okay, let's have that 1 acre, and we actually have solar panels across the whole thing. You have it a little bit more spread out. So maybe they're not as close together. They're also elevated so that you can actually put farm equipment or people or animals like underneath the panels and still be able to do work and farm underneath. And so that land is not getting taken out of production. And so that was something that or right when I started working at Blue Wave Solar, which was my last job, the state of Massachusetts really was starting to incentivize agrivoltaics. And it was so new. They just put out this policy, didn't really know how to implement it or how to judge if a project would qualify. And one of my coworkers had put together a tool. He made it in Excel as if an Excel sheet was like a set of land and each square was a square foot. Each like cell was a square foot. And it was like, okay, sunlight is hitting this square X number of hours per day over like the whole growing season with like trigonometry and macros and all this stuff. He put this together. And then we won a grant from the state to make that into a software tool so that other developers could put in the solar design that they wanted to use and see if it would qualify under the state's incentive program. Because you can't just take a regular solar project and put it on farmland and be like, it's agrivoltaics. You have to like space it out differently, elevate it, tilt the panels differently. There were all these different design configurations that had to be shifted. And so the policymakers didn't want to like have just the solar developers make a project and nothing could grow underneath it. They're like, we have to be conservative and make sure that the farming can still happen. And so I did a lot of work around that, a lot of research into different crops that could work with these different layouts. And then also did a lot of work putting together different like new legal documents for kind of integrating a farmer into a lease, a sublease. There's a landowner, but they're not necessarily farming the land. And you need to have someone on that land so that you can keep this incentive from the state. So that person should probably get paid for being able to make that payment happen. And so there were all these different considerations and incentives to align. So working on that for me was like really exciting and honestly made me realize that as much as I love like deploying commercial technologies, it showed me how hard it is to actually innovate even in a commercial space and also how important it is to innovate at all times. And also I wanted to be deeper into that. So that's what helped me push myself back into the innovation space.
One thing I really love that you mentioned is that you built the MVP in a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the most underrated like MVP builders that people don't realize
Hmm.
are MVP builders because you can just,
Yeah.
that's what you were doing with agrivoltaics, everything. That's super complicated work, right? You could be like, I'm going to build software. I'm going to do this and that. But you all started with a spreadsheet and we're just going to build
Hmm.
off of this and you won the grant and then you piece it together and then you're learning as you go. And
Yeah.
that feels like the classic analogy of I'm going to build the plane as we already jumped off the cliff.
Yes.
And that's the journey. So I love that you
Hmm.
mentioned that. The
Yeah.
other thing maybe that kind of sparked, is there any, you're in like clean energy and a lot of different things that like I definitely don't know. I might know of them. I've seen maybe ventures in them, but is there any like spaces or maybe underrated parts of the climate tech world you're like, oh, people should be paying more attention to this? Or like where if you were to get started, maybe like where would you maybe see, okay, this is really exciting to me particularly?
It's funny. I was like, I'm going to go to Greentown and I'm going to decide because I knew I loved solar already and I knew I was really interested in the agricultural side of things. I was like, let me take a step back and look at all these different types of sectors and maybe find my next passion. And I feel like I've been at Greentown now for 2.5 years. And if anything, I'm less certain on what I would go into because they're all interesting. But I will say something that has been fascinating for me to watch and I didn't know about nearly as much because prior to my time at Greentown, I had solely worked. I also didn't mention this, but I worked at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center on their investments team. It was my first role, which is like I have an innovation sandwich in my career. Like clean energy innovation, investment, clean energy, commercial deployment, climate tech innovation support. So a little bit of a sandwich. But when I was working at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and when I was at Blue Wave, both of those roles were like very explicitly clean energy to replace legacy fossil fuels. And even at Mass DC, the investment mandate was you couldn't even work with any companies that were working with oil and gas or even could potentially be working with oil and gas companies. And so Greentown's very different. We work with a lot of the major oil and gas companies as partners. And a lot of our startups, especially in Houston, a lot of their technologies are in the space of oil and gas, whether it's a company that's working on capturing waste pressure from natural gas pipeline letdowns and converting it to electricity, or companies that are looking at trying to track methane emissions so that they can detect it and then hopefully, shut down leaks. Companies in that space where you're like, that's important and that's like a now problem. It's important to fix these things. I've learned a lot. My perspective has shifted. I still don't know exactly where I stand. I'm still very pro clean energy, first and foremost, but a lot of these big companies have resources that can be put towards this transition. And so it's been really interesting to work with different stakeholders in the space. And so what I've learned a lot in my time at Greentown is more about the kind of industrial space. So climate technologies that could be applied in heavy industry and manufacturing, chemical production, alternative fuels. I know that's a lot of different categories, but in my mind, it all falls under this manufacturing or industry space. And there's so much work to be done and so many emissions we could prevent now that I think is really fascinating. And this is maybe a really geeky thing to say, but there's a bit of a time value of emissions in the same way that there's like time value of money. Like reducing emissions now is much more valuable than reducing them in 50 years. Like a reduction of one gram of CO2 now versus 1 gram of CO2 in 50 years is much more relevant to do it now and has more of an impact longer term. So I think about also what kind of technologies can we deploy as soon as possible. So that's where I think about if I was going to go into any technologies, that would be really important for me to see like that pretty quick to implementation timeline.
It's interesting you mentioned timelines, right? Everything you do it has potentially generational investment essentially because it's
Mm.
we're limiting emissions or impacting this energy source, whatever it might be. You're like every little thing there's a money thing. There's also a lot. I feel like it's sustainability and climate tech has more of, hey, we actually having this like really big ROI. It's just a really long-term ROI.
Mhm.
So on that note, like for you personally, like when you're done with this work or maybe for your career in general, what do you hope that the impact is as you continue working in this field?
I want to see projects in the ground. I want to see stuff get built and that is like actually contributing to either reducing and mitigating emissions or removing them actively. So seeing actual stuff get built is definitely an impact that I want to see. But I think also something that I didn't talk about very much, but I feel like I was very impacted by workforce development support. I went to Northeastern undergrad and they're extremely focused on kind of career support, doing co-ops and internships. And actually, my work at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and my work at Blue Wave came from co-op. I was a co-op. I started as co-op there, and then that's when I started my job at Blue Wave full time right out of college because I had already worked there as a co-op. And my connections to Greentown came from when I worked at Mass CEC when I was an undergrad. And so my whole career thus far has very much been shaped by like those early experiences in the workforce. And so I definitely have a soft spot for helping others get into climate. I think it's so important. The earlier the better, but any time is great. And I also want to have an impact on helping a lot of people get their foot in the door in climate and work on it because I think everyone I know that's not started in climate and has gone into it is so happy because it's a really fulfilling career. It's a really fulfilling field and you can do something that you care about. It's also relative to a lot of other industries, surprisingly lucrative. I know for me, I was like shocked. I was like, wait, this is something I just wanted to do when I was in middle school. I had no idea I could actually have a good career path in this field. And so I think that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily know or realize. And it's only getting better and it's only a growing field. And so I definitely want to have an impact there.
So yeah, it is tons of impact. The money is there. It seems there's lots of different ways to go about it. You mentioned like there's the technical, there's the business side. There's a little bit of
Mhm.
everything in climate tech and everything. On that note, if someone's maybe it's watching or listening to this, like where should they find out more maybe about Greentown or you yourself?
Our website is greentownlabs.com. I'm pretty sure our Instagram and our Twitter and our LinkedIn is also just Greentown Labs. So easy to find us. And then you can reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. Jacqueline, parentheses, Jackie Firsty. I do that so that I can tell when it's a bot messaging me because nobody's name is actually Jacqueline, parentheses, Jackie. So that's how you can find me on LinkedIn. Definitely happy to connect through that and happy to have people reach out and they can find more there.
A big thank you to Jackie for having this conversation. I admire Jackie a lot for helping to, as she put it, get things built, but also because she's looking to help bring others into the work she's doing. Climate tech is a trendy area to work in at the moment, but also is one that I think has a lot of staying power. We do need a lot more people working on climate tech solutions. Let me know what you thought of this episode by leaving a comment or signing up for the station newsletter in the description, and let me know what you thought of the episode there. Thanks for watching and listening.